January 11th, 1919, Westbury, Long Island, New York. The so-called Emperor of the Sahara was murdered by his own wife in the home which was called Phoenix Lodge, or The Lodge. Through her attorney, D.A. Charles R. Weeks, she made a statement, quote, "Yes, I shot him. He had been threatening my life for 15 years and I couldn't stand it any longer," end quote. The case would be before the grand jury tout suite. The couple's 15-year-old daughter would likely be the first witness. The murdered? Jacques Lebaudy. The murderer? Madame Marie Augustine Lebaudy. Constable Charles O'Connor questioned Madame Lebaudy for over an hour, and she admitted to having shot her husband 5 times. She would tell the constable that he deserved it, and she predicted that she would be acquitted like Mrs. Carmen and Mrs. de Sol. We've talked about Mrs. Blanca de Sol before, haven't we, kids? Minnie Wiedner, Madame's nurse, told officials that Madame Lebaudy had returned to her room, threw herself on the bed, dropped something into the dresser drawer, and exclaimed, quote, "God will never forgive me," end quote. A revolver would be found in that drawer with the 5 empty shells. The cook would relate that Jacques would arrive at the house, not welcome apparently, but he burst in through the kitchen door carrying a can of kerosene oil in one hand and a black grip in the other. I don't know what a grip means in this time period. Could it be a gun? 5 minutes later, the cook heard the shots. She ran into the hall and saw Jacques lying at the foot of the grand staircase. Madame was going up the stairs slowly. The cook would say she did not hear a struggle or a quarrel. The daughter, Jacqueline, would come to the top of the stairs and ask her mother, "What was that noise?" Her mother would say, "Don't worry, dear, just go to your room." Now, I honestly did not know this Lebaudy story when I was doing this story about Blanca de Sol shooting her husband John because she wanted her son after she didn't get full custody of him. Well, John de Sol's home, called the Box, actually is right next to the Lodge, the Lebaudy home. In fact, Blanca came to the house and spent over an hour talking with Madame, who was under a doctor's orders to stay in bed. The Lodge was a 15-room mansion in Westbury, Long Island. It was built by Theodore Roosevelt's brother. After a couple of owners, Jacques would buy the home. He was the heir of $75 million in 1919 terms, from his father, who was known in France as the Sugar King. Jacques' story is insane, and you're going to think I'm just making up some sort of odd Grimm's fairy tale, fictional and unbelievable kind of story. But no, it's real. We'll get to the murder and the murder outcome later. First, we need to talk about Jacques. Jacques, inheriting a lot of wealth, became known as the Emperor of the Sahara when he was persuaded by an enterprising friend that Jacques needed to establish a kingdom in the Sahara. Yeah, we're starting out a bit insane from the get-go. After some persuasion from his so-called friend Langerman, Jacques decided to make himself emperor back in about 1903. His throne would be made of ivory, poor elephants, with a purple velvet seat. He had a golden crown made by a jeweler in France, closed crown with a cross mounted on it, and replete with pearls, diamonds, and rubies. He ordered robes to be made in the fashion of Napoleon I. He had 2 flags made quickly. One was his own imperial flag, and the other of his newborn navy. His flag had 3 golden bees on a field of violet and a crown above that. He had a guillotine made so he could have offenders executed. Postage stamps. Yes, he had them designed and printed, keeping 100,000 and saving 10,000 for stamp collectors. The stamp had a ship with a desert and palm tree in the background with the words Postes du Sahara. Jacques would give his friends positions in his new court. He had bankrupt British noblemen and young sons who would never inherit anything to be his courtiers. An American would be gifted with the opportunity to be a part of the court. Colonel C.E. Garrod, according to the newspaper, one of the most gorgeous human beings that ever lived, was appointed Governor General of the Sahara, and if Jacques was away, the colonel would govern in his stead. The colonel would say, quote, "We shall charm the inhabitants of the desert with the phonograph and the gramophone. Let them sing their native songs into it and hear their own voices coming out of these wonderful machines. They will be charmed into the ways of peace by the voice of science. I may tell you also that the emperor has a great faith in the typewriter. He intends to take a number of them with him and to have special ones which can typewrite the native tongues. In short, he intends to introduce civilization into the Sahara, which is not at all the place some people believe, for within its boundaries, which are as big as Europe's are, there are all kinds of land, minerals, and plenty, everything waiting for the hands of progress. An idea of my own is to have an automobile road 150 feet wide right through the country from sea to sea. No trains, their day is over. Monsieur Lebaudy found this country awaiting civilization. He had the capital and the genius, and the world will see what he can do with both." End quote. Jacques spent millions of dollars in supplying his army with arms. He bought 5,000 collapsible houses, 10,000 cot beds, 5 million rounds of ammunition. His letterhead had 2 lions facing each other, and in the middle was a farmer pushing a plow. It said, quote, "Empire of the Sahara, liberty of conscience, force, work, industry, commerce, agriculture, labor, improbus, omnia vincem." End quote. I could have taken Latin in high school, but didn't. Apparently this means work conquers all. The colonists were to receive a salary of $1 a day, 80 cents addition for a wife, and 40 cents addition for each child. No limit on children. So then he took to European countries to try to entice people to become colonists. Swiss authorities threatened to put one of his recruiting agents in prison. Jacques was to be addressed as Your Imperial Majesty, not Jacques or even Sir. His chief valet would have to address him in French and only speak to Jacques when the valet was spoken to. How would Jacques dress on the reg? He would wear a red cap with a long blue tassel, black vest with gold embroidery, pantaloons and gaiters of deep red, bright yellow slippers, cashmere sash around the waist, and a belt with a Moorish knife. He had a steam yacht he used on the Mediterranean with a crew of some 100. Where was this new Saharan haven of delight and sand? Between Cape Juby and Cape Bojador. When he brought his new military to his new land via boat, each man received a bottle of champers, and Jacques would read this manifesto, quote, "Notes on the Saharan Empire Political Organization. The Sahara has been explored for the first time and opened to civilization in the year 1903 by Jacques Lebaudy, who has taken the title of emperor under the name of Jacques I. This sovereignty is essentially territorial. It is based on this principle that from the land comes all sovereignty. It is the system of feudal right, still in use in European countries, for instance in England, the rights of whose nobility have not changed since the Norman conquest. In consequence, the sovereignty is essentially different from the ideas prevailing in France since the Revolution, where all sovereignty comes from the people. The Emperor of Sahara exercises an absolute power over all things, but over his people, this absolute power is tempered by most liberal legislation, founded on this principle: absolute liberty of people, respect of individual rights, American and English system." End quote. He stepped on the land for the first time and declared, quote, "Here I have decided to build the capital of my empire. It shall be called Troya." End quote. And then he backtracked because there was no water to drink, no streams or wells. They got back on their boats, awkward, and decided to have another look-see. He found a new place in a small kind of bay, which he christened the Bay of Free Exchange. And after sailors went on shore and said, "Yeah, we got water here, here's a new city," they all disembarked and started setting up shop. A group of natives were in the area watching. Jacques decided he needed to be firm. He called over the group. His soldiers poked at the natives with their bayonets. He had a sailor that could speak Arab, so he had the man translate to the natives. Quote, "I am your emperor. I have come to rule over this country. If you obey me and furnish me with provisions whenever you are ordered to do so, I shall permit you to live in peace and shall not interfere with your religion and customs. If you disobey or oppose me, I will blow you to pieces. God, Jacques, damn. You see those ships that go by fire? I have 10,000 like them, but greater, in my country at home. You know what a gun is. One of these cannons that I have here will fire more bullets in a minute than 1,000 of the best guns you have ever seen in an hour. Let me show you how it works on that camel of yours. Did he? Jesus. But it doesn't say. I hope he didn't. I shall protect you with my guns and soldiers against the Emperor of Morocco and the Spaniards and everybody else, and you will live in perfect happiness under my rule as long as you please me and obey my orders." End quote. Thinking he was all that and then some after speechifying, he returned to his ship, leaving 5 men behind at the new capital with these proclamations printed for each. Quote, Expedition Occidental Sahara, June 1903. Today we have landed on the coast of Africa. The following rules will be observed with regards to the natives. As long as commercial relations have not been begun with them, they must not be allowed to approach, even if they do not look armed, as they may have weapons hidden about them. It is absolutely forbidden to commit the least injustice towards the natives. We have come to open to civilization a country which is actually unknown and unexplored, and although the inhabitants of the country are barbarians, we must treat them justly and even with kindness. If we are attacked, we will defend ourselves. Self-defense is not only a right, but also a duty. If we are attacked from a distance, we will allow them to have the first shot. If they attack with cold steel, warn them with your voice or with a movement, such as aiming at them if they do not stop. Then fire at them. Each time that it is possible, prisoners must be made and bound tightly. Every prisoner brought will be paid for at the rate of 20 francs to those who have captured them. End quote. Well, my word, it sounds like nothing bad could possibly happen. So everyone but the 5 left to go boating about, find another bay, call it the Bay of Justice. Here will be the largest town of his empire called Polis. Very quickly, Jacques goes there. A group of natives come by. He gives them gold and acts pompous. They think he's probably king of all white men, seems impressed, and Jacques is pleased. So, with dreams of marble palaces, he heads back to Troya, the new capital. He signals to the 5 sailors who had been babysitting from his boat and gets ticked because they ain't coming. Where the heck are his minions? He's thinking court-martial. Finally, pouting, he gets off of the boat and heads to the tent camp and sees there's been a ruckus. The warehouse of stuff has been broken into. Anything valuable? Taken. And no soldiers. Scouting parties were sent out, the emperor cozy on his boat. A scouting party captures a wandering native who is only able to tell them that the sailors were captured alive and are in the desert. The native surprisingly was treated well, given food, and he promised to find the chief of the tribe that had captured Jacques' minions, soldiers. The tribe chief wanted negotiations far away from the machine guns. Smart. They all headed separately towards a beach with the chief and interpreter, the chief saying the prisoners would be turned over to Jacques on the next day after receiving 200 French francs for each prisoner. Ransom. Well, this all sounds well and good. Great. That evening, the rest of the men left at the original camp were resting and relaxing. A dust cloud began forming on the horizon as the sun went down. Dust cloud grew, flashes of light reflecting off of weaponry, camels, horses, mules, riders of a great caravan. But Jacques' people felt no concern. Saharan nomads they had met at the Bay of Justice were grand. Happy to have them for a meet cute. We got wine and smokes. 200 yards away, the caravan grounds to a halt and went into a large semicircle from the water's edge on one side of the camp to the water's edge on the other side, only allowing them access to the sea. No boats. Still, no one was concerned, just thought it was an odd way to initiate a friendly visit, but sure, fine. The leader of this group, with the boss gun, got up, threw down his weapons, waved a white handkerchief over his head, and took a couple of steps. And one of the natives pulled out a rifle and shot in the man's direction, only saved by the fact that he hit the sand face down and buried himself into it. The rest of Jacques' men basically did the same thing. The natives for 2 hours would just shoot here and there, fire a bullet in a tin or in the tin walls of the warehouse, and they finally just disappeared. No one had died. Well, great, what was that all about? Oh, LOL, those natives. One of the soldiers selected for first guard shift, but he's drunk and tired by the day's excitement, and he goes Betty bye, and soon wakes up in the grasp of a native who's trying to bind his hand and foot with a rope. So stuff happens back and forth. The soldiers are outnumbered 10-1, but 2 of the natives are killed. Regardless, the soldiers were overpowered and were tied up. They were strapped to pack mules and were forced on a journey. They received some water, not much food, things weren't good. The leader of the soldiers, Picard, not Captain Picard, unfortunately, would, through some clever storytelling, tell the tale of how rich their leader was and insinuated that, hey, a big ransom here. The natives were in no hurry. They stole the provisions from the camp. They were drinking the wine and eating it up for like 2 days. No rush, man, we've got snacks. But finally they found their fill, and 100 of the natives headed back to the coast to wait for Jacques and see if they could get a ransom. Negotiations at a standstill, everybody decided to sleep on it. The natives with the 5 prisoners stayed in the area, but sometime overnight, a skirmish occurred. A rival tribe conducted a surprise attack and took the prisoners. The chief graciously offered to go find the prisoners, with compensation. Jacques was like, no. Jacques wanted 50 of his men to go ashore and fight. The men were like, screw that, boss. Jacques, the boss, was like, fine, you're breaking the agreement. I'll leave you on shore and sail away. His men were like, yeah, right. You're not going to be alone with your boats and keep from getting them and you in trouble. Jacques' bluff was called. The 3 boats left with Jacques and his men, and they wished their imprisoned soldiers, wherever they were, the best of luck. Au revoir! Jacques and his lads, sans prisoners, headed to Las Palmas on the Spanish island of Gran Canaria. Got questioned by a Spanish official, and Jacques would make this statement in the third person. I'm going to cut some of this out. You've heard most of this already. Jacques Lebaudy took possession of a vast territory which was under the sovereignty of no organized state. In becoming proprietor of the soil without lord or master, it was his right to declare himself sovereign. In this sovereignty, he is affirmed by taking the title of emperor and placing the flag of the Empire of the Sahara above the flag of the House of Jacques Lebaudy. The plans of colonization of the Saharan dominion of the emperor have been deeply thought out and studied from every point of view. It is these arid sands which Jacques Lebaudy proposes to occupy in order to make them a prosperous country. An empire whose existence and friendship will perhaps become at some great crisis very precious for France. Jacques Lebaudy may see himself under the obligation of giving up his status as a Frenchman. In order to assume that of first subject of the empire, he put himself under the protection of some government, which will not seek eagerly to hinder his great work. In opening this new country to civilization and carrying commerce, agriculture, navigation, and industry to a territory which less thoughtful and less enterprising men have despised up to the present, Jacques Lebaudy will have merited well of humanity, and if he has thought it right to add to his status of first proprietor that of sovereign, it is from no vain thirst for glory that he has done this. He has calculated that success could be possible in no other way. It is not the title of emperor which has seduced him who chivalrously consecrates his time and his fortune to such a colossal enterprise without troubling about those who chose to see in him, upon very suspicious evidence, only a comic opera emperor or a megalomaniac. The emperor of the Sahara has no other ambition than to bring to a successful development his glorious work as a pioneer of civilization. End quote. Jacques, very impressed with himself. Spanish official? Not impressed, and in fact wanted no one to let the expedition leave Las Palmas. He went about recruiting a new group of sailors and got 40 to 50 until they heard how Jacques had abandoned 5 of his sailors, and the new guys were like, yeah, we're out. His original group of sailors, who were just done, wanted to be paid the full 3 months of service they had signed up for. Jacques said no, so they went to the French consul. The consul were then becoming curious. Just what was Jacques up to? Here, Las Palmas is telling them stuff. The sailors are telling them stuff. Jacques' people in France warned him that things were afoot. Jacques sent $10,000 to be distributed amongst the families of the prisoner/sailors and to let them know he was going to get them back. Spain not letting him leave in his big old boat. Leaving Spain to deal with Jacques, French government was going to try to get the 5 prisoners back. The captain of the Galilee, a French cruiser searching for the prisoners, would ask the natives if he could speak to them. Yeah, but then the captain said, quote, "Hey, I have some clothes for the prisoners. Will you give these to them?" Each bundle was a blue shirt, blue sailor's pea jacket, and white navy duck trousers. Later, the captain would watch and find men on the beach wearing these. They wouldn't be the natives wearing them, right? In one of the bundles was a note that the captain secreted, telling the 5 prisoners to find an opportunity to stroll to the beach. And if there was, they must stick together and try to get as far away from the natives as possible. Not knowing if they got the note, he watched them carefully with his spyglass and saw them at some point in a tight group wearing the new clothes. The captain would have his crew drop a boat down over the side, and then they started firing. The prisoners plunged into the sea and headed to the boat. 10 minutes later, the prisoners were on the deck and no signs of life on the shore. But the prisoners' time was not a good one before they were rescued, and the leader of that group would die not long after returning to France, and the other 4 would not do well for some time. Though all young, their hair had turned white during the weeks they were held prisoner. Jacques, not deterred, decided that he needed to establish his court in London, get together his cabinet and other leaders, get reps for the Vatican and to the courts in Europe. I guess he didn't take his armed ship for this, as he was now allowed to leave. Before London, though, he went to Paris, insisted on Sire and Your Majesty, and told everyone that things were going great. He would even reach out to the then U.S. President, Teddy Roosevelt, for whatever reason. It's not known what reply, if any, was made, but apparently Jacques would be the subject of some correspondence between the American State Department and the foreign offices of France and England. Sorry, you are not going to get Teddy's Rough Riders to help fight your wars. Jacques just wanted to be recognized as the emperor he made himself out to be. He tried to get other governments to sell him property and tried to get diplomatic relations with the Vatican. But France and England were up to their ears with Jacques, calling on him to come have a chit-chat with their countries. Secret agents from those governments, plus Spain, were watching his every move. They wanted him to answer for what had happened to the prisoners. They threatened to take his property in France if he didn't pay his taxes. And then he was ordered to return to France to perform his compulsory military service in the French army. Well, color Jacques ticked. He was being threatened with arrest as a deserter if he didn't serve his time. He tore that letter up. He would respond through one of his lackeys. Quote, Savoy Hotel, London, October 25th. Sir, His Majesty the Emperor of the Sahara commands me to reply to your letter of October 22nd. His Majesty is under no obligation to pay any attention to this offensive and improper communication. But he makes this reply purely out of courtesy. His Majesty commands me to inform you that he is a foreign sovereign and not a French citizen. The French military authorities have, therefore, no more right to order him to perform military duties than they would to order the Emperor of Germany to do so. Accept, sir, the assurance of my most distinguished consideration. Benoit, aide de camp to His Majesty. End quote. A similar letter was sent to his tax collectors telling them that he was a foreign sovereign and couldn't pay French taxes. Newspapers started to take notice, but not for the way he wanted. It seemed they instead made fun of him for his solemnity and his pomposity. So what you're seeing on screen, he sent this to the State Departments of European nations. You're welcome to click pause. We've heard most of this already, but what I found hilarious was, well, if you watched Game of Thrones and all of Daenerys Targaryen's titles, well, he has a bunch too. Jacques I of the dynasty of Lebaudy, Emperor of the Sahara, supreme feudal overlord of all the oases of Occidental Africa, supreme irrigator of the desert, protector of the Berbers, Bedouins, Kabyles, Riffians, and tribes of the desert. Aha. But he would make no progress towards any kind of official recognition. He continued at the Hotel Savoy in full regalia, getting more recruits and officers for future expeditions, but they would not be paid. They sat around and got mad. One would force his way into the emperor's hotel apartment and try to choke him to death before being stopped by Colonel Garrod and the valet. The ticked man? Jacques had made him a general, promising him the command of 100,000 men and a good salary. No. Jacques would be called a liar and an imposter. All the people hanging about the hotel were annoying the hotel managers. The British government finally told Jacques, "Would you please just get out of England?" So he went to Brussels. Jacques, prior to Africa, had been quite the racing guy, with a stable of horses, jockeys, and trainers, which he released from their contracts, and he would withdraw from the French racing world. But Brussels, considered at this time a racing center second only to Paris, Jacques would get the itch again. So after attending the races, he decided to create a new racing stable under his new moniker, Jacques I, Emperor of Sahara. He requested admittance to the Belgian Jockey Club and asked to register his racing colors. He signed the letter with all of his titles, and he wanted the registration issued in his name as Emperor. Jockey Club? Not impressed. They looked to find any mention of the Emperor of the Sahara as a world ruler. They went to the Belgian Foreign Office. The title Emperor of the Sahara only existed in Jacques' mind. Now, apparently the club had a rule that if a new member wanted to register under an assumed name, they would have to pay extra. So Jacques, you have to pay $40 per horse per year because that ain't your name, bud. He was ticked. He threatened them. They stood firm. He gave up racing. He consulted the court of the King of Montenegro while in Brussels and was told that what he should do was get him a recognized principality, buy it with his millions, a small independent government like in the Balkans, and then he would have world standing. Monaco was given as an example. Here's a tiny principality, only 8 square miles. But the Prince of Monaco was seen in good standing all over the world. Now, Jacques had a plan. First, he would visit the Prince of Monaco to check out his successful administration of his principality. And on arrival in Monte Carlo, was already prepared to outdo the prince and become a rival. Dude, baby steps. But no, he would have a grander palace with his own ocean view. Heck, he already had stamps and coins, which were basically laughed at. He learned many things as he strolled around, but not from the prince, who was not even at home. But he did learn the gossip from anyone willing to spill the tea. After learning all and knowing he could exceed even Monaco, he headed to Montenegro as a guest of Prince Nicholas, then on to the Turkish port of Duraçao. Yeah, lovely. He moved on to Dulcinea, seaport of Montenegro, and short distance from Duraçao. And he falls in love with Dulcinea. Love, 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 love Dulcinea. He hearts Dulcinea. Enough to send messages to Prince Nicholas to get his tuchus over here ASAP. Prince Nick heads over. Yes, thanks for coming. Nice to see you. I want to buy Dulcinea, your leading seaport. After some back and forth, Prince Nick declines. Jacques rages. He wants Dulcinea and would find a way to get it. Prince Nick was like, whatevs. He headed home, but told his government secret agents, keep an eye on Jacques, along with every other country. Anyway, Jacques was not to be deterred. again. He looked for real estate dealers, told them what he wanted, and my word, somehow every house available was at an exorbitant price. Jacques had dough, though. He bought a steamboat landing, 3 stores, 6-seating mansions and farms, and other land in the suburbs. Then he falls for a slave girl named Amna, buys her from her owner, and has her set up shop in his house. She gives him a tale about her missing sister. He goes out to look for her, but in Moorish dress, I guess to blend in, winds up in an ancient city and is mistaken for a Venetian embezzler. He gets thrown into prison despite his protest. No one has heard of the Emperor of the Sahara. Amna, to her credit, or seeing her money train in jail, goes to search for help with the Austrian consul, who, thankfully for her, had heard of Jacques and couldn't believe he was a real person. The consul communicated with Venice, found out about the embezzler that had been caught, and went with Amna to get Jacques freed. Then Jacques becomes acquainted with an American interested in looking for oil deposits. This friend told him, forget about buying a nation, buy the presidency of a small country. So he started looking at San Marino. Small country, smaller number of voters whose votes he would have to buy. San Marino had a good relationship with the world and already had treaties in place with other powerful countries. But he didn't want to just be a president. He could become president and then boom shakalaka, crown himself Jacques I, King of San Marino. But damn it, France was not going to let Jacques go. You've got lawsuits regarding the sailors you abandoned, and France was forced to rescue. You evaded military service. You won't pay your taxes. You're going to lose your property. And his sugar interest, in order to get the profit from those, would require his return to France. Press pause on San Marino. We're going to Paris. So before he goes to France, he has published in the French newspapers a kind of decree about how to treat him because of his status. You can press pause on this little picture here and read all about it. Anywho, this was in 1905, which means everything I've already talked about happened only since 1903. From Pasha, Jacques' Minister of Foreign Relations. Quote, the present note has as its object to state the numerous grievances which the government of His Majesty Jacques I formulates concerning the government of the French Republic, the French judges, and the numerous French debtors of His Majesty Jacques I. 2 years have now passed since the Empire of the Sahara was founded by my august master. Having become an independent sovereign, the Emperor of the Sahara had no reason to withdraw the real and personal property which he possessed in France. In every civilized country, foreigners have the right to hold possession, and their property should be respected in conformity with the laws of nations. France, it appears, is not a civilized country. Ooh, burn. For obeying the vilest sentiments, French ministers and judges organized and encouraged the methodical pillage of the properties which His Majesty in France. End quote. Jacques, still in France, away from his bought slave girl, who now he finds wanting and deficient, he's still looking for that Empress of the Sahara out there, somewhere. I'm not going to get too much into his flirtations and ladies who were not impressed and refusing marriages. He's got enough of other issues to talk about. He also had a brother who met with issues and died in his early 20s. His mother was being extorted by an old friend. The lady extortionist and her family would be found guilty eventually and sent to prison. Jacques' mother was by no means the only one to suffer monetary loss. With justice served, Jacques was trying to get his sugar competitors out of business and performed such a coup that somehow he managed to quadruple his huge fortune. At this point, he had also decided that he couldn't compete with the likes of France, England, and Spain. He decided instead to go to Europower and just ask for permission and their cooperation in allowing him to develop his empire. And a good place to do this was at the Algerian conference where some of these powers be at. He would write up his speech in preparation and have a couple of his agents go to the conference to present it ahead of time. Then he would follow up for an in-person showing. Quote, I respectfully ask the permission of the assembled representatives of the great powers of the world to conquer, civilize, and colonize such portions of the desert of Sahara as I have described above. If I am allowed to do this, I will make a happy, prosperous empire of the dreary wastes of sand which now serve no useful purpose, but are, on the contrary, a perpetual menace to the peace of the rest of the world. End quote. Well, the conference powers that be refused to consider his claims unless their consideration was also requested by French representatives. You know, those French reps ticked at Jacques. He raged. Then he took a walk and heard his name called out by a woman passing by in a cab, one Marie Augustine Delière. She was a popular actress of the time in Paris and had been his first choice for empress some time ago, but they had quarreled at the Savoy a while back. She left, returned to Paris, and now we have a chance meeting, and he found her even more adorable than ever. Quarrel forgiven and forgotten, she sympathized with all he said. He was desperately telling her he loved her, and 3 weeks later, marriage. She agreed they should leave France, and after their honeymoon, she was determined to get his life straightened out. By the time they were ready to move forward, they would have a daughter named Jacqueline. They would head as a family to New York, and he enjoyed the hustle and bustle of American life, but did have to change his views. His sizable fortune in most places was not much in a land, or frankly city, of multimillionaires. He had to put his ideas of an empire by the wayside and instead strove to increase his wealth. He was adventurous with the stock market, and it would usually pay off for him, and he would invest that into mining companies in South Africa, South America, and other places. But Jacques was having some issues with his mentality by this point. He feared an unseen enemy pursuing him and trying to exact revenge on him. Had he just been through it and was mentally exhausted and overwrought? Or was there someone really trying to do him in? In thinking he needed to throw his enemy off the trail, he began to neglect himself and his clothing. No more jewelry, nice clothing, or silk hats. He could not keep one place to live or they'd find him. He divided his time between 2 hotels, going to one first until midnight and then going to the other to stay through the morning. He had no office, just one address to a lockbox at the post office. He carried many satchels with him to carry everything he needed, like one filled with money, other with gold pieces, business papers, and such. He would employ several different stenographers to do his correspondence, at least what he didn't do himself, and would never dictate letters to the same stenographer more than twice a week. He took cabs frequently, a fine way of eluding your enemies, though he dressed simply. He still loved some pomp in his life and lots of servants, but he was rarely at his actual home, the lodge on Long Island, as we mentioned at the beginning of the story. So this is what he would tell cab drivers. He basically had his own 10 commandments of the taxi cab. And he actually carried printed copies of this. Number 1, never let a hotel doorman or other lazy hound touch your door or assist your customers in getting in or alighting in any manner. Number 2, never blow your horn until you have passed the danger zone. Number 3, never ask for any information under any circumstances nor solicit my patronage. Number 4, never seek to assist me in any way unless told to do so. Number 5, never speak unless spoken to. Number 6, never look behind at your passengers. Always keep your eyes straight to the front. Number 7, never shut off your motor. Keep it running at all times. Number 8, never stop directly in front of a door which I wish to enter. Always stop 25 feet in advance. And after I alight, drive 25 feet beyond the door and wait. Number 9, never hold conversation with anyone. Number 10, drive slowly on all occasions. Never speed under any consideration. Alrighty. The straw that broke stuff was when he invaded the Meadowbrook Hunt Club, a bougie place, leading a group of messenger boys he had hired. The members of the club were watching a polo match when here comes the group on horseback, no less, making quite an appearance. Jacques was in the lead, nicely dressed this time as he needed to impress, and behind him 20 boys in columns of 4 dressed in military-type costume of various countries. The boys carried weaponry, air rifles, a bayonet at the end of a broomstick, other rusty sword-type things. The group went into a huge semicircle in the center of the field and drew out a sheaf of papers, apparently reading their contents, presumably before they were to be read. But here tears down the road a man on a horse, swiftly coming up to Jacques and whispering in his ear. Uh-oh, the jig is up. The sheriff has come to Jacques' party. Jacques drew his sword and handed it to the sheriff, saying impressively, "I surrender to the government of the United States." The sheriff had received a heads up the night before from one of Jacques' neighbors that he was acting a bit off. Jacques had placed guards around his house and was keeping traffic from passing by on the very public highway. And then a message would arrive that the telegraph office in New York was trying to find their missing 20 messenger boys. He would be warned about things, he would act like he was giving in, then Jacques would do more stuff. So what would happen? He would be put in a sanitarium, and while there would actually make an investment that would earn him over $150,000. And he felt safe in the sanitarium. The people trying to get him couldn't get to him. But then he got released and the same fear returned. He would spend a lot of his income trying to hide himself in New York City. Very rarely would he be his old self, making plans, looking into business enterprises. Most of the time, he would try to keep himself from being tortured or assassinated by unknown people. After his death, many of his belongings would be found that would shed some light on his issues that it seemed like most were not aware of. 12 different hotels would have hundreds of pieces of his luggage, some filled with newspaper clippings about murders, lots and lots of murders, and the emphasis on these murders seemed to be those that were done suddenly, without warning, and by an unseen attacker. Other batches of clippings were about protection against assault, and because of some of his handwriting seen on these, it appeared he had tried out some of these weapons. He would employ private detectives when he thought the bad people were getting too close, or he would get bodyguards. He carried a .22 caliber revolver always. In the winter, he would carry 2. And yet with all of this, he was still able to focus on business. 1907, he made $1 million on Erie Railroad. 1915, he bought 3,000 shares of Canadian Pacific and sold them for a nice profit. A broker would say, quote, "Back of his eccentricities lay a mind of amazing power. I know for a fact that for many years he kept $4 million in hard cash lying ready to his call in London banks. Several New York banks held other huge sums. He had close connections with the most important financial houses all over the world in Europe, South America, Asia, and South Africa, as well as the United States. In France, he owned villas, forests, farms, and other real estate worth certainly $3 million. In South Africa, he owned a highly productive gold mine, for which he paid $500,000. His judgment of the stock market was remarkable. No one in the last 25 years has been a keener operator. His Wall Street speculations were often conducted on a tremendous scale. But they were always so cunningly concealed that even his own brokers were not aware of their real magnitude." End quote. But his eccentricities and the way he lived were taking a toll on his family life. His wife was worrying herself sick over what was happening to her husband. And unfortunately, he was focused on their daughter, Jacqueline. Feeling that he was not going to survive long with his hidden assassin menace, he had reasoned that Jacqueline was his sole heir. She would have to be on the throne of the Sahara. Therefore, she would be a sought-after object by those unseen terrorists trying to get him. So as soon as she could walk, he would insist on taking her on his vagabond adventures, moving hotel to hotel, so she too could keep undercover. But Madame was like, yeah, no, that's not happening. Madame would pour love on him, beg him to get enjoyment out of the wealth they had and enjoy life. But he couldn't do that, and nothing anyone could say would shake his resolve to protect himself and now his daughter, or to get them both to the Sahara to rule the land. No matter what she did, he would outwit her. Madame had intended to send Jacqueline to school, but she felt she couldn't, and the child would not make friends, would not learn properly to read or write. Madame's friends would tell her, get a gun, arm herself. She didn't want to do this, but then she heard the story of Blanca de Sol shooting her husband John. You know, their neighbors. For a week before his final night on Earth, Jacques would visit the house in Westbury and demand to have Jacqueline. Madame would refuse, and he would rage and leave. But that Saturday night, he came to the house at about 6 p.m. Jacqueline would be hurried upstairs and told to lock and bolt her door and put the iron bars in place. Jacques was more ragey than previous visits, ranting and raving. Madame, seeing no point in saying anything to him, went upstairs to her own room. Well, he didn't like that. He stormed through the rooms on the first floor, breaking glassware, tipping over furniture, shouting curses at the top of his lungs. And then it became quiet. Very quiet. Madame listened at the door, hearing nothing but her daughter's sobs from the nearby room. She left her room and was about to approach Jacqueline's door when she heard foot tread. Jacques was heading upstairs. Praying for guidance, she went to her room, to her dressing table, and withdrew the revolver. She went back into the hallway and looked down the stairs. He was on the first step. He saw her, jumped up the steps 2 at a time, and had just seized her by the wrist, reaching into his hip pocket when she shot him 5 times. It wasn't until the last bullet, she would claim, that his grip on her wrist relaxed, and he fell backward down the stairs to the first floor. She fainted. Jacqueline would eventually leave her room and would see her father's body at the foot of the stairs and would call out on the telephone, "Come quick, my mama has shot my papa." Obviously, this is Madame's side of the story. We don't know what Jacques' story would have been. Madame is arrested and put into jail. A messenger boy, once thought to be more helpful to the prosecution, swerved and was thought to be more advantageous to the defendant. The messenger boy, one of many that Jacques seemed to employ, would accompany Jacques to the lodge and went inside with him and would be made to leave by Jacques, not by Madame as was originally thought. He fled the place, fearing Jacques would hurt him. So rather than it being Madame sending the boy out to get rid of a witness to her premeditated crime, it was thought to be Jacques who wanted rid of a potential witness. Father McGinnis would tell how the lodge was once beautifully furnished, a 52-room mansion. But over the years, quote, always Lebaudy was smashing something or burning the treasures of the home. He would take a beautiful rug out and set fire to it. No one ever knew why, end quote. Smashing furniture with an axe and then burning it. And, oh yeah, Jacques was allegedly carrying a revolver in his overcoat when in the house. Dr. Mary Bentley at the State Insane Hospital would say that Jacques was paranoid. Remember the 2-part story I did about Harry K. Thaw? Yeah, Jacques was a bit like that. Jacqueline would testify, quote, I was born in France 3 years after my father went into his Sahara adventure. I can't even remember him as being anything but mean to me. The first time it seems that I have any recollection of him was at the hotel in New York. He never was good to me. He never even spoke to me unless it was to order me around. He always looked like he was making fun of me. I know he didn't like me, and he made Mother cry every time he saw her. That always made me cry, for I love my mother so. I never could play with other children. I couldn't even go to school. He wouldn't even give us enough money for that. Even when I was in St. Joseph, which was a school on Long Island, Mother had to come and take me out because he would not pay the bills. He wanted me to work, and lately was always ordering me to do things around the house, even to build fires. I remember when we first came to Westbury, he used to stay there nearly all the time. He was always doing something to Mother to make her sad and cry. Sometimes he made her scream. Whenever he said anything to me at all, it was something mean. Oh, I longed to go to school. It was the only pleasure I could have had. Mother bought me pretty dresses when Father was liberal and gave her money. Father was brutal to Mother. He nearly killed her once, choking her. I was upstairs that night, the night of the murder. I didn't see Father come in at all. I hadn't seen him for more than a week. Mother wouldn't let me. I knew there must be something the matter. Mother was always taking my part. Every time he and Mother quarreled, she would get frightened and would keep me close by her. Last Wednesday, she had locks and chains put on the inside of our bedroom doors. Her room and mine opened into each other. She didn't tell me what those locks and chains were for, and when I asked her, she answered, "They make it safer." She had to go through my bedroom to the stairs Saturday night. I was standing stiff. I was so afraid. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it was terrible. Father was always doing awful things, and I knew when I heard the shots that he had come home. Mother came back through the room and fell on the bed. I managed to telephone Mr. Moore. End quote. The only nice thing she could say about him was that, quote, when Father was away, he would write Mother once in a while and would send 10,000 kisses to me, but he never gave me the kisses when he was at home. End quote. To be fair, we'll give the other side of the coin from Jacques' attorney, E.C. Murdoch. Quote, stories that Lebaudy was of an aggressive temperament are entirely at variance with what I know of the man and what others who know him have told me. He was a quiet man, and I never knew him to assume the aggressive. Lebaudy never carried a gun, and despite the story of the alleged wife and the authorities, I do not believe he had a gun at the time he was murdered. End quote. He would claim that the authorities had it in for Jacques, and that he was eccentric, not insane. Madame would eventually be freed by a grand jury as the authorities could not find any evidence of premeditation, that it was self-defense, just like she thought she would be, like Blanca de Sol was. Jacques would be buried fairly unceremoniously in comparison with what he would have envisioned had he had his empire. And though Madame and Jacqueline knew he had money, they, like everyone else, thought he had squandered it on all kinds of stuff. He would go to cheap restaurants, buy a coffee, and bring his own food. The home was not luxurious inside. Madame and Jacqueline would not have sufficient food. Jacqueline would get nothing for her birthdays except a kiss and a tear from her mother. But then they would learn the estate was worth hundreds of millions. He owned land and mines all over the world. But, oops, there would be a bit of a turn. The lawyers would threaten to destroy future happiness by revealing that Jacques had never actually married Madame formally. And though Jacqueline would be considered his natural child, she could not be heiress. Then we have Jacques' brother and sister who want everything. Well, quickly here, though I'm sure it wasn't quickly done back then, the courts would recognize that they had a common law marriage in the United States. And back then, that wasn't really a written thing from what it sounds like, but England recognized it. And other countries where Jacques owned property and such would satisfy themselves that if the U.S. and these other countries thought it was fine, well, they did too. France? Probably not. I'm sure they are just done with the Lebaudy name. From what I would read later on, Jacques' brother and sister did get all of the French property. So Jacqueline, about 14 or 15, is due to inherit a lot. Maybe like $200 million, probably much more. All the jewelry he had bought her mother for their honeymoon had been hidden in a safety deposit box, which no one knew about until the bank wrote her after the trial was over to tell her, hey, come and get this stuff. But before you stop feeling sorry for Jacqueline, remember she cannot read or write English. She was not put in school. She can speak French, but cannot write but a short letter and with lots of mistakes. She knows nothing of math, spelling, music, history, or geography. Jacques would not allow her to be tutored or to attend any kind of school. Girls shouldn't be in school. They should only exist to attract men. Their brains didn't matter. Once when he caught Madame trying to teach Jacqueline to read, he became livid, forced them to go upstairs, and barred them in a room for 4 days. At mealtimes, armed with a rifle and a bayonet, he would open the door and show them milk and the food he had procured. He would wave it in front of them enticingly, then throw it to the floor, stomping on the food, and the milk went everywhere. Only when the mother and daughter attracted the attention of the gas meter man outside did Jacques finally let them out. But now, teachers and governesses have been brought to the house to help Jacqueline along with neighborhood young women to become friends and acquaintances. So, what would happen? 1922, 3 years after the murder, Madame and Jacqueline would get married in a double wedding in Paris. Now, this was confusing because it seemed like Jacqueline had gotten married first, then she and Ma took off and left. Mainly, the intention was solely just to secure Jacqueline's inheritance, as she couldn't get the inheritance until she got married or reached her majority. But Henri Sudreau, the father, was a detective. I guess the mother and daughter were found. Jacqueline wanted an annulment, but I guess that didn't happen anyway. Did any of this happen? I don't know, because then another paper said that Madame would marry a French detective named Henri Sudreau, and Jacqueline would marry Henri's son, Roger, in a double wedding. Madame, in the course of things, would inherit about $2 million, Jacqueline the rest. Once in France, supposedly nearly all of Madame's money would go to pay off Jacques' debts. But anyway, I think they were probably okay. 1930, Jacqueline would file for divorce. I didn't look anymore after that as to whether or not she got it. As always, because I'm wishy-washy, part of me has to admire Jacques' moxie. Just thinking, I'm going to build an empire. Of course, he basically had the money to do whatever he wanted to do, but he did move forth and try to do it. But then his own ego seemed, from what I can tell in these newspaper articles, got in his way over and over and over. And did he really go insane? I can't say. For sure, it sounded like he was extremely paranoid. And if what he had done to his wife and daughter over the years, particularly towards the end, was true, well, quote, the difference between insanity and genius is measured only by success and failure, end quote. Masashi Kishimoto. See you.